welcome back. I hope this is going to be strong enough now. The musicians are kindly on stage again. I will let them play in a bit, but I thought to talk a little more broadly about Bach. After all, this is the first half of the evening was really about Bach. The evening is called Bach to the Future, which was a joint effort in a title. Let's face it, it's a very broad title. But this idea that Bach is still relevant and a metaphor that we can still be learning from. Plus, he's a genius. We enjoy hearing his music, of course. I realized that one thing I perhaps gave the wrong impression in the first half was that I was looking at his music and tiny details, as if somehow if you miss the details, you've missed the point. That's, of course, not true. There are thousands of performances and tens of thousands of recordings enjoyed all the time where people are not listening with that sort of detail, and the music still has its power. It still says a lot to the listener, almost however closely they're listening to it. So I didn't want to give the impression that Bach is a miniaturist, far from it. I mentioned fractals earlier. You don't know how close, it doesn't matter how close you are to his music. Bach is sort of fractal in his activities. He's writing for his general public, the citizens of Leipzig, for most of his life. He also has an eye on the musicians close to him, teaching his sons, teaching his students, but he's also an eye on posterity, as I mentioned, the idea of perfecting the art of music. And correspondingly, in modern life, some people are putting a CD on to have a bath to, some are rehearsing a lot. Musicologists are still studying this intensely and solving puzzles, or as I mentioned in the first half. I thought I would, though, start by not looking to the future, but Bach's looking at the past. He was unusual. He's an unusual man in many ways, just through his sheer talent. But one of his unusual sides was his interest in old composers. For example, Frescobaldi, a long-dead Italian keyboard player, or there's another, Palestrina, of course. Bach was very interested in these people and found their music, wrote it out, studied it to an unusual degree. And as I'd already mentioned, the Bachs before him, he preserved that stuff for us, which is wonderful, he did. He was acutely aware of a sort of a musical inheritance and a duty to preserve it and protect it for the people to come. And I wouldn't be surprised if he saw his work as being like making a link in a chain. He is a link. So he had to make that link in the chain from the past to the future as strong as he could. Now contrast that with many musicians, many artists today, many of whom are completely rejecting the past in the interests of, for positive reasons, originality, freshness, new thinking. But in music, it can be a dangerous thing. A composer who's rejecting what's come before them is in danger of repeating what's come before them without knowing it. So that's in itself a waste of time, you could say. But also the danger is that they're left with a bit of a vacuum but in rejecting the past, they're rejecting it by lack of knowledge of it and lack of curiosity about it. So in a way, they have nothing to reject. They don't know it in order to reject it. Do you see what I mean? And Bach is a perfect example, and there are many others after him. The line goes on. People like Mendelssohn, Schumann, Beethoven also. There he is. Who are very interested in the past, even as they're forging ahead to opening new roads into the future. And Bach is definitely one of those. And I sort of get rather sad at the musicians, performers, and composers who are not interested in the past. There's a lot to be learned, of course. And Bach knows that he's doing good work. He knows that he's probably the best composer he's ever met. But he would never dare say that, because he also knows the danger of hubris. You know, if you think back to the Renaissance, artists regularly would produce a work of art, a carving or a sculpture or a painting, and their name would not be on it. They didn't sign it. We often know the artist only from their work. Sometimes we don't know their name even, or they're called Jacob of Verona. You know, that's all we have to call them. Things are so different now. So let's face it, today, There are many artists, many people, we know their names, but we don't know their work. I mean, we can, I'm sure, whichever country we're from, we could make a long list of people whose names we're very familiar with without knowing anything of their work. Not to mention, I'm not talking about the sort of C-list celebrities, which I don't know if you have it here, we have it in England. They're really famous only for being famous. They do nothing. But anyway, I'm not talking that. In fact, that's something that worries me only a little bit. This idea that particularly television stations somehow try to let us think that with a few weeks of lessons and good advice from an expert, you can do almost anything. You know, you can be a conductor or an opera singer or a ballroom dancer or a pop star. You know, these programs, you know what I'm talking about. I'm just only worried that they're going to have a thing of, oh, let's put someone in charge of the economy of a small country and see what happens. Or put them running a nuclear power station. That's good for some ratings, you know, a meltdown. But there's a risk that this sort of glibness, this sense that, oh, things are easier, it really goes against the arts. And the music is the one I know. I've often heard musicians talking about a magic figure, that to play an instrument to the level that we're hearing the musicians this evening play their instruments requires an average of 10,000 hours of practice before the age of 20, which is quite a staggering figure. And on stage we're looking at, well, I mean, they're only 21, all these musicians, but we're looking at hundreds of hours, 100,000 hours of playing, probably. I don't know, one of us should one day add it up. It's a scary amount of time devoted to perfecting the art of playing. And it sort of worries me that the general public, and I'm not talking here to the general public because you've chosen to come here, but the general public maybe thinks that, you know, get a celebrity along to teach you the violin and you can do it in 4 weeks if you make the voting, if you pass through the voting system. Anyway. And I was playing the violin a lot. I had to practice, just to keep still, I had to practice a lot. It was like losing battle all the time. But I'm now conducting. I meet many musicians who are working really hard to achieve the levels they're aiming for. And I'm not only talking about the concerto soloists, who of course, many of them, they're practicing right to the minute they play the concert, and as soon as they go off stage, they're off practicing again. I mean, that often happens. I'm talking about all musicians. I hate the term, we have in English the term rank and file for a member of an orchestra who is not a principal player. I hate the term because it makes them sound like sort of a pawn in a chess game, sort of hardly worth anything. They're just filling a seat. They're far from it. An orchestra is the most amazing combination of people. I was thinking of how could I find a simile to describe an orchestra to you? It's like 100 racehorses doing synchronized swimming. It's the most incredibly complicated thing. If you want to see, I mean, forget the football teams and all those. Come and see an orchestra working. I'm not talking about putting the music to one side. Just to see an orchestra of skillful musicians working is the most incredible thing. I'm sure you know that already, because I'm sure many of you are regularly seeing the orchestra, and so you know why. It's more I want to tell the other people as well. But as you can hear from the rhythm I'm going, there's a but. And I don't mean Beethoven's but either. There's a but here. And the but is that there's a risk that if we guys do 10,000 hours of practice, that we do the exact opposite of what it is we perhaps in our dreams should be doing. We maybe fossilize the very music we want to liberate. I haven't expressed that very well. Let me start from another way. Many countries send their young music students to a conservatoire. I have to say it, Sweden, you don't have conservatoires here, do you, in Sweden? No. But of course, the first conservatoire was in Paris, started in 1795. The date, of course, telling you why it's called a conservatoire. There's revolution in Paris, people are getting squashed and guillotined. The only way to ensure the young people can study music is to protect them, almost to lock them up in a building and conserve them, and that's why it was called a conservatoire. Yeah? So it had a very good reason for the name. But of course, as time goes on, it's no longer the musicians who are being conserved, it's the ideas of their teachers are being preserved, like sort of, well, as I say, fossilized or ossified. That's the danger. That a young person goes in full of wonderful dreams of being a great musician, maybe not yet with fully formed technique. They go in there, they study, they come out with fully formed technique and zero creativity left. I'm exaggerating a little, but unfortunately it's true that very often music schools are producing the very opposite of what we hoped they would be producing. Creative musicians who sit on stage and are spontaneous. Now I have to say, I'm standing here next to three wonderful musicians who are not only, as you could hear, beautiful players in themselves, but have worked so hard as a trio to make their trio like an organic thing. I'm not talking about the musicians I'm standing next to, of course, because that would be very rude apart from anything else. But there is a danger that ideas get fixed when actually the general audience, well, put it this way, if you play wrong notes, most people don't mind, to be honest. The people who do mind are your fellow musicians, the concert promoter, the critics, and maybe the teachers who are there. But the general audience doesn't mind the odd wrong note. I love going to concerts. I wish I could go to more, and I never mind a wrong note if it's for a good reason, you know. If it's because someone was unprepared, that's not so good. But if it's because they were trying to achieve something, then wonderful. I'm willing to hear 100 wrong notes if a beautiful, spontaneous performance comes out of it. And that's what I'm referring to, this sense of spontaneity can often be missing, that the conservatoire approach can ossify things and fix them. Now, musicians also must remember that the audience, the very act of coming to a concert is an investment by the audience. And many musicians get so familiar with the practice of performing that they forget the investment and the trust that the audience shows to them. I feel they often should reward the trust better. And I'm sure Bach would be wondering why I'm talking about this. Surely musicians are creative. Of course, the best musicians in his time being able to improvise, being able to create spur-of-the-moment atmosphere was the thing that set them apart from, the rank and file. You know, that was the very thing. Surely that's what we aim at. But strangely, in music schools, it's the last thing that's on the curriculum. The technical accuracy is what's highest. And of course, the arts are under sort of financial pressures, which puts more pressure to get perfection, to get results. You know, I mean, I feel for those who administer the arts nowadays. Arts administrators are unsung heroes because it's a very difficult job balancing the needs of the prima donnas on stage with the realities of modern life and budget balances and things. They have to be as skillful as any manager running a business, but they also need to be idealistic and have vision. And I admire those people who can do that. And it reminds me that nowadays we're almost having to justify the existence of the arts. And that would amaze Bach. Not only Bach, it would amaze most of the last 2,000 years. There are two historical examples I always remember thinking about this. I studied classics when I was a student. Plato went to Sicily, and the people of Croton, the city there, Croton, asked him to set up like a efficiently working state. How do you do it? What do we need? Do we need a parliament, a water system, lots of executions? What do we need? And he said, what you need first is a temple to the Muses, which is in his terms. The Muses are, of course, like the patron saints of the arts. You need to attend to the arts first. That's on that your civilization is based. And that's already extraordinary, but what's more extraordinary is that nobody laughed. They did build a temple to the Muses. They took his advice and said that's how they started. And then the other quote is, I haven't been able to find the exact source of it. It's Winston Churchill during the Second World War, the British Prime Minister, was asked when they were sitting down looking at their rapidly dwindling amounts of money, shall we divert the culture budget, which is already very small, shall we divert that into the military? And his answer was, if you do that, why are we fighting? You know, it's a great quote. I'm sorry to say I can't find where it is, but maybe someone can tell me. But that's my point, that the arts shouldn't need justification. We should rather celebrate the fact that they're as healthy as they are and benefit from them, of course. They need to pull their weight. We need a good health service, good hospitals. We need to give the children good quality food at lunches. But I would say the arts are up there. And to argue that they're not is to follow well, Stalin was the one who said that a pair of boots is worth more than the complete works of Shakespeare. You know, there's a risk that that's the way some politicians are going. So it's not that I would want to passionately defend the arts. I want to say that the arts, like the hospitals and the schools and the churches, they don't need defending. They should be part of life. But the artists must do their bit as well to supply, to aim as high as possible. And by the way, in Bach's time, there were money problems, of course there were, but it never stopped the musicians from doing their job. There weren't unions to block things. And do you know Bach's salary was paid from the beer tax? There was a tax on beer, and that went to the musicians, which was ironic because they were probably the ones who drank most of the beer. So, at any rate, now things, of course, are changing in this world fast. A good example would be CDs are on the way out and downloading is in. You know, so there's a moment you've got your CD player there out and everything changes and you can't keep up, and it's complicated. We have to work hard just to stay still, like me practicing the violin. But also concerts, the model of concerts maybe is changing and perhaps should change faster than it is. I'll give an example of that with one of the saddest things I ever heard. I was on a tour. I was with an orchestra. We were traveling around the Midwest of the United States of America, as I seem to have spent months of my life doing, on a bus. And we would drive for 8 hours and get to a concert hall and rehearse and play, and then sleep in a motel, and then get on the bus the next day and drive another 8 hours. And the bus driver was this really nice guy. We talked to him, and he waited outside during the concert, waiting, dozing, to collect us, to take us to the next place. And so the second night, I said to him, why don't you come into the concert? And he said, will they let me? Yeah. That was the saddest thing I ever heard. What a failure we were at letting that man know the concert is for him. It's for everyone, you know. And he said, I don't have a tie. Oh, come on. So we gave him the best seat in the house and someone sitting next to him to sort of tell him and answer his questions, you know, what's that big instrument there, things like that. And he loved it, of course, and he came to all our concerts. So that was a success story. But his original question made me realize, gosh, we're really getting things wrong. Now, having said that, of course, there are huge projects of sort of outreach going on. You think of that wonderful thing, maybe some saw it on television, that the Berlin Philharmonic, one of the world's greatest orchestras, with Simon Rattle, one of the most exciting conductors, they did a performance, and I think they did this several times, of Stravinsky's Rite of Spring. And they got I wrote it down, yes, 200 young people from sort of diverse, disadvantaged backgrounds in Berlin to dance the Rite of Spring. It's the most fantastic project, and those young people will remember that for the rest of their lives. I'm sure you've all heard of El Sistema, or if I mention Gustavo Dudamel, the conductor in Göteborg from Venezuela, he trained in El Sistema, the system they call it. I had to write this down to get the numbers right. It's a youth music organization in Venezuela. It's so far helped 250,000 young people, 90% of them from deprived backgrounds. This is from their website. Learning instruments, playing in orchestras. There have, I don't know now, but there have been 125 orchestras. The goal is to use music for the protection of childhood. Conservatoire again, hooray. Through training, rehabilitation and prevention of criminal behavior. The program is known for rescuing young people in extremely impoverished circumstances from the environment of drug abuse and crime into which they would likely otherwise be drawn. This is fantastic, what they're doing. I have nothing but praise and wonder at what they've achieved, and El Sistema has started in other countries. I believe Bolivia has it, Cuba certainly has it. They've even started one in California. Gustavo Dudamel now conducts in Los Angeles. He started one there. There are these things springing up. I love this. The founder of El Sistema has dedicated himself to a utopian dream in which an orchestra represents the ideal society. And the sooner a child is nurtured in that environment, the better for all. Wonderful. I love the idea of an orchestra as an ideal society. I think there are one or two people who've worked closely with orchestras here. I can certainly see one. I think there are two here. Orchestras are fascinating things. They are a microcosm of society with its problems as well. I have to say, they're wonderful things, but they're very complicated things. So that I love this idea that put children in an orchestra and they can learn how to be a person amongst other people. It's definitely true. But there's a tragic side to the I shouldn't use that word. There's a side to this that also makes me weep. Because I was a boy growing up in England in a small town north of London called Bedford. I don't expect, if you don't know England, I don't expect you to know the town. But the town and the area around it had extremely good youth music. And that's partly why I'm standing here today, because of the opportunities I had as a boy to play some of the great works, to run an orchestra myself, or a few of us. We started an opera company. I played The Rite of Spring when I was 14. I don't know what it sounded like, but I thought it was marvelous, you know. And you know, this organization in Middle England in last April was the victim of funding cuts. 100% gone. The system allowed anyone to learn a musical instrument, and now it's gone. It doesn't exist. I find this so sad. And then in 15 years' time, they'll say, hey, look what's going on in Venezuela, how marvelous El Sistema is. And I'm thinking, I had my El Sistema, and you destroyed it. You know, this is what I'm saying about arts cuts. It's short-sighted. It's a false economy, saving a quick buck, but really causing lots of problems. As a friend of mine said, this is when he was 20 years old, we don't need drugs, we've got Brahms, he said. And it's absolutely true, and that was Middle England. So things are sort of changing. I won't take too long to say, I was involved in a concert a few weeks ago in Göteborg, in Gothenburg, where the orchestra, or some people looking to the artistic policy of the orchestra, was thinking we need to wake up the system of concert giving. We're getting too settled. It's turning into like a museum of musical performance rather than a living place. And they did this experiment of commissioning a composer who was really with them on these ideas to take two of the most famous classical pieces and recast them, rewrite them. One was Albinoni's Adagio, and the composer was Anders Hultqvist. And he wrote this lovely, what you might call a meditation on Albinoni's Adagio. It was a beautiful piece. And he took Beethoven's Fifth Symphony and redesigned it. Almost all the notes we performed were by Beethoven. He just changed the orders around. The piece didn't start ba 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 ba, it started all mysterious. it didn't finish in triumphant C major, it finished mysterious. He took the symphony and redesigned it by moving things around. And the comparison that was drawn was with what they do in the theatre, where they might take Romeo and Juliet by Shakespeare and set it not in Verona, but in the Bronx, or in Dalarna or somewhere. And they might change the plot a bit, they might change the order, they might cut it because it's quite boring, it's very long and rather boring. The theatre has been doing this for years, decades, generations actually, and also the opera houses, some of them. So they were trying to apply that model to the concert hall. I have to say, it was all very interesting, but I don't think it changed anyone's thinking in any way, because we were still standing there wearing our tails. And the audience was still sitting there clapping in the quiet, in the gaps, Nothing actually changed. So I think it as an experiment, it wasn't, it perhaps didn't achieve what it meant to achieve, though there were some interesting side effects, and it was mildly controversial, which was, that was quite a good thing. Some people thought it was good, and some thought it was bad, and that's healthy at the end of a concert to have, different opinions. This all maybe seems quite a long way from Bach, but the idea of an orchestra as a utopian thing, a model of society, is very much in Bach's territory. I can't remember if I mentioned it earlier, this idea that you get several people playing completely different music but coexisting, that the music can be a very clear metaphor for a society, and should I be saying a democratic society? Yes, I suppose so. I've just been in the States, and there's the big debate between evolution and intelligent design. Maybe we probably have some Americans with us, I think, today. And I love the little child who was confused and asked their mother, so which is right? Is it evolution or intelligent design? And she said, well, to be honest, whichever is right, they're both marvellous, which I thought was great, a great way around it. But you could say that the musicians who are being creative with the music Bach has given them are probably every time you play that, you've played this piece a lot, haven't you, the three of you? I mean, I know you've recorded it, you've studied it, and you've been playing it for years now, maybe, I don't know, how many, 10 years maybe? Yeah, exactly. Probably every time you come back to it, something is different, something evolves. And even if only you feel it, you do feel it. It is evolving. And yet, the notes on the page have stayed exactly the same. You could say there is a God in this context of this piece, and it's Bach. But there is also evolution going on. And that's the wonder of Bach, that he's the most fantastic composer for doing that. And that's why I hope you'll be playing it in 10 years from now, and indeed 10 years after that, so we can come and hear how it's evolved, So that's sort of really what I wanted to say, really. But, I do feel I said this to the musicians, and I said it at the beginning of the evening, that you've been very kind to listen to me talking, but the most wonderful thing here is to have three lovely musicians to play the music of this man, and I've asked them to play a little more of the Goldberg variations, and they kindly said they would. You're going to play from variation 25 to the end, so we've got 6 variations, and then Bach finishes the whole set with the theme again. And they've chosen to start from one of the most beautiful moments, not only in the piece, but in Bach's compositional life. It's just one of the most extraordinary places to start. So thank you for doing that. I was rather hoping you would do this one. So it's enough talking from me. Thank you for your attention, but now let's give very warm attention to the Ziliakis person right in and trio.